Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. How did it happen?
What's up, guys? I'm Dan. Welcome back to Speaking Through the Gray, episode number 14. We've got an awesome guest today, my dad, Pastor Dennis Gray. There we go. We'll fade it down. That'll make it sound better. So today we're going to be talking about dealing with grief, especially around the holidays. So you are a hospice chaplain. So tell us about kind of how you got into that and just a kind of like brief overview of what it is being a hospice chaplain.
15 years ago, I began my journey as a hospice chaplain. Initially, it was going to be part-time. Tori and Tim were getting ready to get married. And it was a good way to make some extra money to help out with the wedding and everything. And so that was my initial thought. Never in my lifetime did I ever imagine that that would become my career. And a lot of lessons learned in that journey of being a hospice chaplain.
Yeah. What were the hardest lessons to learn right out the gate?
Right out of the gate is the topic we're going to talk about tonight. Grief and bereavement.
Yeah.
And I got an interesting story if you want me to share.
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
Of course, being a hospice chaplain is kind of, like being a pastor. You got people you're responsible for to take care of and everything. And my strong suit is not sitting in an office. I do study and I have my office time, but my strengths are being out with the people, find out what the needs are. And I was raised in ministry by my pastor, who taught me the importance of going to the hospital, going to the nursing homes, caring for those who can't care for themselves, or they receive a debilitating diagnosis or they're injured, they're in the hospital, they need some extra support. Well, one of my very first hospice patients was an 89-year-old lady that her family was taking care of her, but she was alert and oriented. And I went to her house and had my formal orientation, and they sent me off on my own to visit getting to know the lady, I can talk as good as all the rest of our staff, and I'm a sucker for stories. I love hearing people's stories, and this lady was very captivating and talking to me about how long she was married. Like I said, 89 years old, and her husband had died 10 years previous to us getting together, and she was telling me about their marriage, their relationship. And I started probing a little bit, and I said, ma'am, her name was Mary. I said, Mary, how long did it take for you to get over the passing of your husband? And it was like I became mortal enemy number one with her. Ooh. Her face got so distorted, and she stood up, probably 5 foot tall woman, and she pointed her bony finger in my face, and she said, I'll have you know, sonny boy, that I have never, ever, and nor will I ever get over the passing of my husband.
Wow.
It takes a lot for me to be speechless.
Yeah, right?
I was speechless. This 89-year-old woman took me to school on grieving. They didn't teach me this in college.
No.
I didn't learn it in many ministry experience. I learned the value that grief is not something you get over. It's something you get through. And we're constantly educating our hospice patients and our families. We do a lot of pre-bereavement, preparing families for the passing and individuals for the passing of their loved one. We educate and help them to see that this is a journey. you are going to be on, and you're not going to always be heavy-hearted and crying all the time. As we'll talk in this broadcast, that grief and bereavement is cyclical. There's a cycle that you go through, different stages and such. And I really had to educate myself on that in order to be, very effective in preparing people who are dying and also their families what to expect. But each person is different.
Yeah, no, and everyone deals with it different. And I feel like, I know we'll get into this amongst many other things, but we were talking earlier about like the stages of grief, which, okay, good. It's in the screen. I was just making sure it's on the screen. Okay. So the, common understanding is the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yes.
And this kind of is a broad range of grief, like, we were talking earlier, like loss of a job, loss of a relationship, multiple variety, not just the death of a loved one.
Right.
And so, obviously on surface value, each one kind of explains itself and how it goes through. But you also sent me this one, the 7 stages of grief. And if you could walk through these and kind of like as a hospice chaplain and how you're speaking, sometimes pre-preparing people for dealing with grief, but like how each one is impactful in the process. One
of the things that our social worker does, and sometimes I work with them along with our bereavement coordinator with hospice, and we do what's called a risk assessment. To gauge where the family is, it could be a family member, could be a whole family, and also where the patient is in regards to understanding their terminal diagnosis and how to help them. And through that risk assessment, we learn to gauge our attention, focus on any areas that's already they're displaying some kind of distress. It could be the physical, it could be the emotional, it could be spiritual. We treat the whole person with hospice. And so each discipline, the nurses treat the physical, the social workers treat the emotional, and the chaplains are trained to meet the spiritual needs. So
now with that, do the social workers, because I don't know, I mean, I think I've known that there are social workers in this, but like, I know obviously they're going to deal with the emotional side, but as a chaplain, you're also dealing with that as well, because spirit is not, is multifaceted, because all those can attribute into all the other areas,
Right. And that's where it takes a team effort. Every Wednesday, our nurses, our social workers and our chaplains, we get together as a team to discuss any changes, any signs of distress. How can we better help manage their care? And every discipline will give input. And so it is so valuable because we're there learning from one another. The nurses and the social workers really don't know a lot about the spiritual aspect that the chaplains handle. I don't understand all that the nurses and the social workers are doing and what they're going through. However, when you are a part of the team, you learn to pay attention to details, and you pick up on different areas of distress, how certain ones are in distress, and it just when you're part of that team, it stays in the back of your mind, and you learn from each patient what the warnings to look for and everything. But the 7, I just came across this afternoon, just doing some extra research for tonight, and these 7 stages are basically geared to help those who are in a high risk assessment, where it could be the high risk involves several losses within the family or with the patient. They've experienced, could be loss of a child, loss of a relationship, and the stress level, the anxiety level is through the roof. And that's where these 7 stages, you got to take your time. But we have found that these stages don't really go in order.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I
sometimes.
guess it really depends on your personality,
Right.
your mental state, and how you're set up mentally. But like also, and I don't know why I've never thought of this before, but like your job is to help with the person who's passing or in final stages
Yeah.
of life, to process what they're going through, and then also the families. But like, do you go through helping a person who's in the final stages of their life learn to grieve as well? Like
to prepare them.
Yeah.
And that's where my role as a pastor comes in, because I have such a heart, such a burden for people who don't know Jesus Christ. And I have learned, God's given that wisdom and discernment to walk carefully and not shove the gospel upon people. I purposely ask and intentionally ask permission, and if they I can tell if someone is interested and when someone is not. And I don't push an agenda, but my natural inclination is to want to see people come to know Jesus, and or discover, if they do know him, discover where they're at, and how to help them to have a closer relationship with him. So it's asking the right questions, discerning what's going on, and being patient. You can't be pushing an agenda. You gotta step back. You gotta discern. Sometimes you gotta just sit and listen.
Yeah.
Very, very valuable.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think you learn that the older you get, you kind of
it applies in many different stages.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I know even with work, like I can be a bit of a hothead and try to resolve things with more dynamite, and just be like force my way through a situation. But it's like sometimes I just like, you gotta shut up and sit down and just kind of hear what's going on.
Oh yeah.
And you get a better lay of the land. But yeah, that is interesting. Going through, especially with the Christmas season, for people who are either have somebody who's on hospice or have actually had a loved one pass away. I feel like this past week is just like every time I went on Facebook in the last week and a half, it's like one of my friends who's in his mid-30s, his wife just passed away, and they've got 3 little kids. And just thinking about the grieving they're going through. And like one of my other friends, her sister-in-law just passed away, and it's just like every time I go on Facebook this week, it just seems like just a lot of people passing away. But people who have dealt with that, or somebody who's already passed away, say a year or many years ago, the holidays seem to be a hard time, because it's just a collective memory of being with family and friends. How do you counsel, or how do you speak to people that are dealing with that grief?
The grief experts that are out there, and there's many great counselors that are trained. They say that the time period between Thanksgiving and New Year's is the most difficult time with people who are going through grief. Again, it's a journey, and sometimes it depends on the situation, depends on the person. We try to, another lesson that I learned. I try to educate myself along with our staff, because they can get burned out, and I have to make sure, maybe you need to take some time off. You're losing your stuff. But there's a Honduran proverb that says that when grief is shared, it becomes half grief. So, and I share that a lot to get people to give themselves permission to grieve, because some people are so private and don't want you to know their business, and they have been erroneously taught that that it's embarrassing to cry, or it's an embarrassment to open up and talk about your problems. You don't have to open up the closet and bring out all your skeletons and everything.
Yeah.
However, you can talk about what's eating you up. And unless you do open up and become transparent, and I'm not saying you need to go on social media and broadcast all your hurts and everything, but find someone you can trust and you can have confidence in that will keep the privacy. And when we have that someone or a group, with hospice, we do have group bereavement groups that do get together, people who would find the value of hearing someone else's story. So getting people to open up is one of the key ways, and sometimes it takes a while. But when and people who do isolate and keep things in, I don't know who coined the phrase. They're called stuffers. They stuff their emotions. And some people do it intentionally because they learn from others, and other people just don't even realize it.
They just don't know how to express their...
No, they don't. Emotions are tricky. But when you do open up, and you can feel, just like I said with that Honduran proverb, when grief is shared, you share your story. I do this in almost every funeral or celebration of life service that I'm called upon to share, to get people to see the value of understand God wired us as emotional beings, and it's okay. To shed a tear. It's okay to get angry. We need to express ourselves. And I told you earlier, I had a funeral today. Got a phone call last week. 32-year-old lady had passed away due to some health issues and left behind a young boy, several siblings, and her mother. And what a heartbreak. To see some of them were very stoic and they were doing exactly what I'm telling people not to do. They were very quiet and just in control of their emotion. And then there were others that were sobbing, and so you can tell people were just holding it together long enough, and that's okay.
Because sometimes you think they're trying to be strong for the family, and,
right?
They kind of want to grieve privately and stuff. Which
and there's a time and place for that. Who wants to be around someone who's always crying and sobbing? I mean, we've had to deal with them. People like that, and help them to know that they're valued, that they're loved, and that there is support. But there should be some boundaries eventually to be able to learn how to handle the emotions, where you don't have to be calling someone all the time. You give them. We have a bereavement program that involves 13 months of follow up with families after a loved one dies, so our bereavement coordinators and we have a dynamic team. We just had you were part of this. We just had our annual hospice memorial service where we remember the lives of all of our patients from January 1st right up until October 31st. And so we had a number of families that came out, and our bereavement team was there helping out with the service. And sometimes they go beyond that 13-month benchmark for extraordinary circumstances, because some people may require some extra TLC and everything. But that is the standard from other hospices too, and grief support groups, that they try to lay down some boundaries and help them with materials, help them to learn to do self-care and take care of themselves, and understand that their journey is still valuable, and they can move on in life, but they'll always keep those memories of their loved one deep down inside.
Wow, that's powerful. I had no idea. So it's 13 weeks?
13 months.
13 months?
13 months.
Oh, I thought you misspoke. Okay, 13 months.
13 months, yeah. So a little over a year.
Wow.
And there's been some that end up being 2 years because of the circumstances of the death. And it was a spouse in one case. Actually, both cases come to my mind. It was a husband that had passed away, and couple was married a long time, and no kids, and so the wife was left to grieve alone, and she would turn to the church, she would turn to the grief support, and the one lady, she was calling me every night. And she was wearing me out, and such, and so we had to lay down some boundaries for her, so she can eventually learn to take care of herself.
Yeah,
and
take it into her own hands.
Yeah, so in some cases it had to be tough love. We had to speak truth in love. There's a way to do that. There's a way to be tactful without getting a shouting match, and some people a little more difficult to deal with than others.
Definitely. So, dealing with grieving, obviously you do it professionally, which is a weird thing to think about or hear sometimes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've run into plenty of people in the community, like, at one time I was a teller at a bank, and she was like, Pastor Gray's son? And and she was like, I was like, hospice? And she's like, yeah. And she told me, she's like, I don't know how anyone can do that for a living. So
I remember that story now.
Yeah. And dealing with that, I mean, and a lot of people, they're like, I don't know how. I mean, you have to be called to do something like this, I feel like. I mean, you can do it without that, but I feel like God wouldn't have wired you to be able to stick through and continue to do it in such a strong way of ministry like that. But what do you think? I mean, obviously years of ministry experience led up to you doing this, but and obviously lessons learned early on, like you're sharing earlier.
Exactly.
But is it still hard dealing with that constantly being around death and grieving, or do you almost find solace in it, where God gives you supernatural peace? I'm trying to break it down in my head, but you know what I'm saying?
And I can go 6 months without taking a day off. I work Monday through Fridays. I'm on call. And our hospice team knows that I'm there for them. I'm there for emergencies and everything. It's rare that I get a call after hours, and always trying to be there to offer funeral services, to families who might need that support and everything. But there is a high degree of burnout, and gotta be honest with you. Last week, I hit the wall. You and I had a little heated texting discussion, misunderstanding, and I'm going through grieving. But it's the loss technically was with Mom, and her diagnosis with her heart, of which was interesting because I went through that first stage of denial and shock. Thank God that God spared her life and everything, but I struggled with that. And still do. I'm better now as time goes on and we understand what's going on with her heart and everything. But when the doctor first met with us, actually met with Mom, he's getting ready to do the heart cath and everything, and he's going over her labs and everything and tests, and I really don't see much wrong here. And his words before doing the heart cath was, a lot of women have false positive stress tests, and so we'll see what we find. And an hour later, the nurse comes to the waiting room and gets me and says, you can go back to Tammy now. Doctor had to put a stent in. And we kind of expected it,
because that was an option on the table.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we've dealt with that with others and such. But this is my wife. 37 years. And so we're sitting there. About 15 minutes later, the surgeon comes back, and he's like a loving grandfather, pulls up a stool, and tells us, I've never been more wrong in my life. Wow. Your widow maker. And when he said widow maker, I fell apart.
Goodness.
Because I've dealt with church members that had had to have open heart surgery.
We had 2 of them this year.
Yes, yes. So I was well educated on what the Widowmaker was, and they call it that for a reason. And the fact that where I started to struggle was when he said, your Widowmaker was 99% blocked. Wow. And it was like, we looked at each other. She knew what the Widowmaker was. And that, I went into shock. I mean, I held it together for Mom, and it was just, I had troubles processing that. And that was kind of like a loss. And so, thank God thank God for the 1%. She didn't have to have open heart surgery or anything. Within 3 hours, she was back home. With some limitations and everything. But a month before that, we were in Peru.
Yeah.
What would have happened? What happened if it would have been 100% blocked in and flying to Peru and flying back? You're in
being in
pressurized,
the air for 8 hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what could? But that's where God settled our heart and helped us to see she's living and she's going to have a better quality of life now and such. But that and then of course you threw a monkey wrench into the equation back early fall with and we've talked about this and I was expecting your job change to go from our church to Nebo and such, and that to me is a lot. It's a loss for you because we've been in ministry for several years together, and to see you mature and grow, I had to revisit that, and it's just. And I can usually put on a good face. I try to have my emotions under control, but I really haven't talked to too many people about it. People say, "How do you?" Oh, I'm fine. Things will be fine. And when we got into that little disagreement last week, all of a sudden, Tori and Mom said, "What's wrong? You're not yourself. Something's off." And that's when I took Friday off, and I had to disconnect from, the hospice world, ministry world, and take care of myself. And Mom and I went out and did a few things. She had a cardiologist appointment and such, and that gave us a little more peace of mind. We did some things together, and I did some things by myself. Of course, her family came in and everything, so they had their ladies' time, and I had me time. And self-care is so important for those who are in the industry of end of life comfort. And I've talked with a lot of our staff, and I can see burnout, and I can see when stress is really eating our nurses, and I'll take them aside and I'll say, maybe we should take a day off. And we're very transparent. They see it in me, and I've had office staff, where we go once a week and participate in 3-hour-long meetings. And our clinical director took me aside one day. This is back over the summer, and she said, "Are you okay?" And she's known me for a number. She was one of the nurses who took care of Grampy, and something's not right. What's going on? And I wasn't really transparent with her. I said, "Yeah, I got a full plate." Trying to balance ministry and hospice and everything, but we need people like that to have that helpful eye and learn to do life together.
Yeah. No, and that's like you said earlier too, when we were talking about like grieving and making sure like the half grief,
Yeah.
Because I know going through a lot of different things I wouldn't have been able to do unless I had people in my corner, to like talk to, obviously family, and then also like ministry colleagues that I can reach out to and ask and be like, because sometimes we have our own perspective, but it's always good to be like, am I missing something? Is there, somewhere area I might need to be called out in to like change my perspective?
Yeah.
But
It's interesting with accepting God's calling. I interact with a lot because of being a chaplain. Also, I interact with a lot of ministers, Catholic priests, Protestant ministers, and such, other Jewish rabbis, and those are the Hindu faith, and actually, I had my first Buddhist patient back a couple months ago, and she wasn't practicing, but I was told that was her faith, and so you learn to interact, and I've had several other ministers, different faiths, different religions, say, "How can you do this day in and day out?" And my response is, because knowing it's God's calling, I respond by saying, "How can I not?" And then I go on to explain, I'm a people person. I got to be out where the needs are. But the best person to help pick up on, when I'm burning out is Mom.
Yeah.
She'll say,
yeah.
"You need to take a sick day, take a personal day," and she'll see just going through the motions and losing the joy, and so. But Mom has always been a good judge of what's going on with me. 37 years, she can read me like a book.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure her out.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, no, it definitely comes down to that. I know with Jazz, and there's so many times where like she'll see or say something, and I'll be like, "Dang it!" I feel like the first couple years of marriage, especially like you like know each other and they'll call each other out on stuff, and like the other person's right, but you're just mad that they're right for the first couple years.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it probably still continues later on,
Yeah.
but it's you have to have somebody strong in your corner.
Don't you hate it when our wives are always right?
Yeah, always right. It's frustrating.
I'll give them a 99.9%.
Yeah. Word. Like one or two more things, and then we'll get into the final question. I forgot to tell you to have a question for the next guest, but
Okay.
you can come up with something on the spot. But so dealing with grief, personally, like even within our family, I mean, there's been situations like where our cousin Sierra's youngest child passed, or even like your dad passing, which was 10.
It's interesting. I was just sharing, it's pretty sad when some of your good friends are funeral directors. We have the same sense of humor.
Oh, good.
And I was sharing with Michael Harrison. He's the funeral director at Hubie Hughes in 44, and I've known him for years. He actually. When Grampy passed away, he's the one that prepared his body, and then the funeral home from upstate New York came and received his body. So we talked. I said, coming up next year, April 2025, will be 10 years that my dad passed away.
Yeah,
that was super hard. I had to take my minister hat off. I had to take my chaplain hat off and be his son. And of all, all my siblings were in, and each one of us were taking shifts when we were told, he was close. He was actively dying, and so we pulled all the stops for Dad. We had a Yankee game on because it was in April, and he loved his Yankees, so he could hear the game, and God worked it out with the timing that I was the one holding his hand when he breathed his last. And never easy. I can definitely say I've never gotten over. I've gotten through the moments. Holidays are going to be tough. His birthday, the anniversary. And sometimes, and for me, it's just how I process. Anytime I see the number 22, that he died on April 22nd. And I'm thinking of my dad. And I get to share my dad's story. And with hospice, you got to be careful not to become too involved. And because I love to talk, I struggle. I keep
finding
thinking
that line.
Yes. It's and they teach us don't become emotionally involved. Don't become too connected, and don't monopolize the conversation.
Yeah, because you don't want to like insert yourself into their
tough.
thing. Yeah,
That's very tough.
Yeah.
Because I'm very and I want to help, but there's they teach us professional courtesy. You got to be careful. And it's okay to share some things, but there's I'm constantly struggling. Where is that line sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, like, looking back at Grampy Gray, it's crazy that it's almost been 10 years.
I know.
Because I remember leaving, like, bolting straight in the middle of the day from work when you called me and drove down, or up, technically. I was in Harrisburg. But, like, to be there and see Hospice from that side because, they're, being in that room where he was literally surrounded by family when he took his last breath. Like, that's the only time I've ever been around somebody when they took their last breath. And it was like, sticks with me, obviously, to this day. Yeah. But what a powerful, powerful thing to see. Because I'm sure, there's a variety of different people and situations you encounter in Hospice where people might not have that opportunity or to be able to see that. But what a beautiful
it is
reality of his story.
And we often use the word bittersweet with Hospice and funeral, celebration of life, because you're especially for those that we know knew the Lord, the Lord Jesus as their Savior. You have that confidence that and that's our hope for living. And 1 Thessalonians 5 chapter 4 talks about, as believers, we are not to grieve like others who have no hope. Don't grieve like unsaved people. That does not mean that you stuff. That means that, remember, your hope is not in your loved one. Your hope is in Jesus Christ and His promises, and that keeps me going. You got to maintain your faith. And that helps me because the emotions are so tricky and just sometimes hard to manage, and that's where you just got to keep going back to the Lord. Yep.
Amen.
So, and when we had our little tiff last week, I had to man up and I had to apologize just with my overreaction, and because my emotions were really oozing out in different ways, and because I wasn't doing self-care, it eventually manifests itself in ugly ways and such. And thankful for a strong family unit.
Amen.
And constant forgiveness and lots of love.
Yeah.
Lots of love.
And that's one of the things I always tell people, like, growing up, like, I forget, I think it might have been in like late middle school, early high school, something happened where we had like a tiff of some sort. I don't remember what it was, but like, you apologized to me and one of my friends were over it, and they're like, my dad nor any dad have I ever seen has apologized for anything. Like, it's definitely not a character trait we see a lot. And I realize, like, even with like Gideon and Gabe, I'm like, they're only 4 and 5, but man, they drive me nuts all day. And I have to be like, all right, Daddy's patience is not great right now. I'm sorry, but I love you, Yeah. But no.
It's I'm glad to be able, because my dad modeled it to me.
Yeah.
And my dad was not a super saint by any stretch of the imagination, but he loved his Lord. Made a lot of mistakes, as a dad, but he was humble. And admitted when he was wrong, and that I'll never forget that. And I'm thankful that he stuck it out when the chips were down and family dysfunction and everything, and he was always there.
Amen.
So that's what led me to make right choices and pass it on down to you. Because
Amen.
you're really getting tried.
Amen. 2 more things. So one, what are like some go-to verses that you reference when you're, dealing with people going through the grief process?
Often my go-to verses are the 23rd Psalm. And because I always ask permission to read You know, I never assume because, you know, the different nature of people and where they're at, you know, spiritually even. But I'll ask, you know, is there a scripture that I can share with you that will give you comfort that you've leaned on before? 9 times out of 10, it's the 23rd Psalm. And for those who really do know the Lord and they have that confidence without a shadow of a doubt, if they were to pass away, they know where they would spend eternity. I go to John 14, 1 through 6, talks about heaven. I sometimes the old King James in me, you know, comes out when you get to the part where Jesus says, "I go to my Father's house to where there are many mansions," and the only translation uses that. But yeah, it's just some people are comforted by the fact that He's preparing a home for me, and so I keep that on the positive, and I emphasize that. I did that funeral today, and it was interesting because didn't know the family. They didn't know, but we talked on the phone and such. And so just for the service start, one of the siblings of the deceased came up to me. "Oh, by the way, can you make sure you only use the King James version?" And I have my NLT open right and thank God for Bible apps because I was able to
saves the day.
where there's 100 translations and everything. So that was a little saving grace there. Some people are comforted by an older translation. It's even me. I memorized a lot of my Bible memory verses were in King James.
Same for me. That was only in the 90s, but I still can't say John 3:16 without a couple extra ifs.
Exactly. These and thous.
Good. Well, one of the things we do is we have a guest. They'll ask a question that goes to the next guest. And
all right. What did Wayne Morgan ask?
I believe it was. What is? I think it was an and or, but either the best Christmas you've had and or the worst Christmas.
That's a tough. Well, the best, and I listened to that podcast,
okay.
but I was trying to rack my brain when I was coming here. What did he say? I can't say that I've ever had a worse Christmas.
What about the one when we were sick in New York as children?
Oh yeah,
we had the stomach bug on Christmas morning.
At my parents' house. Yeah. That was pretty bad. I forgot about that. I'd like to go on to mine and Mom's first Christmas together. Yeah, it was before we got married, but we she was living up in Schroon Lake, and I was an hour south, and she wanted to go home for Christmas, and so I drove an hour north to pick her up, and then we drove 8 hours south.
I was about to say that Maryland. Is a long trip to Maryland.
Yeah,
wow.
And on a youth pastor's salary, I was also working Burger King, and so finances weren't all that great with us.
I'm sure your car wasn't in the greatest condition.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were down there a few days before Christmas and tried to go Christmas shopping on little to nothing.
Yeah.
Next to nothing. And it was so embarrassing. I wanted to get her this thing and took a look at the price and took a look what was in my wallet. No credit cards back then. And I think I got her a cheap pair of shoes. And I said, listen, I don't even remember what she probably, Mom was very frugal and everything. And she was pretty good at that. I struggled but she was so satisfied that it just, our first Christmas together, we had nothing. A pair of shoes. It just, she was so happy because it came from me. It came from my heart. And that was a memorable Christmas,
wow.
To me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you guys dating or engaged at that time?
We were engaged.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was about to say, if you weren't, I'm sure Pap would have gave you permission after driving her 8 hours to Maryland.
Yeah. We got engaged on his birthday.
Oh, okay.
And kept changing the date for the wedding, and that's when we decided on February 14th eventually.
Valentine's Day.
So,
Yeah. That's awesome. Now, do you have a question for the next guest that we have on the podcast?
Let's see. Keeping with Wayne Morgan's theme there, what is the thing about New Year's resolutions?
Okay.
What is the craziest New Year's resolution you have ever made? Just thinking,
that's good because I think the next guest will most likely at this point might be after the New Year's. So
that's what I figured with the timing.
Yeah.
What's the craziest New Year's resolution you've ever made?
Yeah. Do you have one of the craziest ones you've ever made?
Of course, the craziest is trying to lose weight.
I know.
Try and fail, and everything. Yeah. Actually, this year, Mom and I went on that journey, and she lost 40, I lost 50, and such. So I gained 20 back, but
but hey, that's still a win.
I'm still much lower than I was a year ago.
And
such, and so the battle of the bulge, that's not easy. But I know some people have aspiration. I'm going to get married, and I'm going to change my vocation and everything, and so
some
people may have some crazier resolution. You never know. You never know.
Weird.
So, but not too big on resolution, but
they're tough.
Mine
2 years ago was I downloaded the Babbel app and paid for a full year subscription, and then got so busy that I didn't use it at all. And one of my coworkers still messes with me. But
how's that working for you?
Poquito Espanol. Still having. I always rely on translators everywhere I go. So So I'm sure the next guest will have a great story.
Look forward to hearing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on, and thank you for sharing. And if you guys have any questions in the comments, make sure to let us know. We'll drop some resources, some passages, and no matter what you're going through this season, there is hope in Christ, and there's hope in knowing God's heart and God's heart for you. So hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you next week on Speaking Through the Gray. Bye.
Speaking Through the Gray.